as he had 35 points. Meanwhile, Donovan Mitchell finished with 41. Okay, Chiney, who is the better player right now? Is it Devin Booker or is it Donovan Mitchell?
Save you, Charlie. Sleep, come to the West Coast. The games start.
I would love to. When do I get the invite? You and Stephen A. on the West Coast having a good time. You leave me here in New York.
I know, we got you, girl. You're my girl, so of course I always got a room for you out here. But, you know, watching these games were great. We finally had an NBA night that we really deserved and are excited as we build momentum towards the playoffs. And now both Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker, I feel like they knew that we were going to do this. I feel like they knew that we were going to debate this performance because they both showed out. Both guys shot the ball over 30 times. Both are two-time All-Stars. Both are 24-ish years old. And right now, I think it's really easy to argue that the Phoenix Suns are surging. It's apparent. And a lot of that is due to Chris Paul's leadership. And look, Devin Booker, do not mince my words. Devin Booker is a bucket. But from a team perspective, I know that they just took a loss, but the Utah Jazz have been the real deal this entire season. And the more complete player right now, probably because he has to carry that role, is Donovan Mitchell, just because he's a combination of everything you need right now in the NBA: scoring, moving the ball as a point guard. I mean, his athleticism, one of the most athletic players in the league under the rim, but then obviously he can dunk over the rim, working to become a better defender. The Utah Jazz are the only team, I believe, that's been top 5 in both offensive and defensive rating this entire season. And that'll shock a lot of people. And I'll say this, it really moved me in a different direction when Steve Kerr played them a while back and said, hey, this team, the Utah Jazz, reminds me of my team a couple years ago, talking about the Warriors, how they got it done as a team defensively from that perspective, but then also just the amount of threes. I think they lead the NBA in made threes. So overall, this is a solid team. Donovan Mitchell is a complete player, and I think that's why you're seeing them atop of the NBA in the standings.
Yes, using the word better makes it tough because you have to define when you want them, how you're evaluating them. So when I talk to a couple of scouts about this question, they say, look, on a night in April, do I think that Donovan Mitchell is maybe better to have a chance to win? Yeah. But what about in a playoff series? And the thing that scouts like about Booker versus Mitchell is he's just bigger. He's 6'5", 6'6", and that makes it a little bit easier for him to create his own shot. Donovan is spectacular with his footwork, and he's developed his three-point shot. In fact, Donovan actually shoots the three quite a few percentage points better than Booker does, which I don't think any of us would have expected 2 years ago. But in the end of playoff games, when you need to get that shot creation, Donovan has to work so hard. Now, granted, he has shown he can work hard and deliver it, but Booker's size and his little bit more flexibility on defense, I think might give him a little bit of an edge. But boy, I'm nervous saying that because I saw how Donovan played in the playoffs last year. He put together a couple of stunning performances, and I feel like he's got more of that in the future. And, you know, he's got some more playoff experience than Booker has. That's the big thing about the Suns. That's why Chris Paul is so big for them. None of their core players outside Chris Paul and Jay Crowder have stepped on a playoff basketball court yet. And so that's going to be a really important thing. How does Booker handle that postseason pressure? Because he's got the package to be a guy who can win a team a playoff series.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you compare these two players, they have different strengths, but both are at very similar points in their career with opportunities to prove themselves, Brian. Now, of course, when it comes to the final shot, we all know most people will want to see Devin Booker with that. We saw that in the bubble with their run that has carried over to this season. But one thing I will say about Donovan is that the weight that he's had to carry, he's had to lead this team offensively as the primary go-to. And he's been forced to improve his game, as you mentioned, with the three-point shot. He has taken that next step forward from last year to this year in a way that Devin Booker, you know, playing with Chris Paul, sort of has the luxury of being able to, you know, spot up and shoot. And now they have their own playoff run. It's been fun. I think it's tough to compare both. They have very different strengths. But overall, both guys are doing exactly what they need to do for their teams to be successful.
Well, last night, Devin Booker did a lot, and he did it with the help of Chris Paul. The two combined for 64 points. That's the highest total that they've combined for as teammates this season. So who knows? Maybe we're getting a little preview of what we can expect in the Western Conference Finals. Who thought we'd be saying that, right? All right, Wendy, thank you so much for your
in the NBA playoffs.
And Brian, this is where I want to sort of bring up another factor that people might be sleeping on. While we really love the offensive firepower that the Brooklyn Nets have, or just offense period with the way the game is officiated, I remember when I was playing, the refs had this meeting in preseason and they're like, all right, you can touch the defender once. We called it the hot stove rule, but after that, you can't touch them again. And guess what? Now the numbers have gone up with shooting, but defense is really interesting. And maybe it's the Final Four, the national championship carryover that I'm seeing with defense and defenses winning championships in the collegiate level. But really, the Lakers, people sleep on the fact that the Lakers have the #1 defensive rating right now in the NBA, that the Utah Jazz, also a top and elite defensive team. A lot of the top teams in the NBA, apart, even the Philadelphia 76ers, apart from the offense, the top defensive teams in the NBA, they're doing it on both ends. And so when you look at that aspect of the game, Brian, do you think that this is the Lakers making a move to get Andre Drummond, a guy that averages like 13 rebounds a game, now bolstering that already #1 overall defense in the Lakers? I see the Lakers making a play at defense, knowing that Brooklyn is set up historically for offense.
This is going to be a test of history here, because historically you are correct. You have to be about a top 10 or 11 defensive team to be an NBA champion. The record speaks for itself. But we are playing in a season where we are seeing historically off-the-charts offense. 7 or 8 of the top 10 offensive seasons by team in NBA history are happening right now. I scan the box scores every single night, guys, and every single night there are teams that are shooting 53, 54% and losing. There are some teams whose records, when they shoot 50% or better, are around 500. In the past, you shot 50% in a game, that means you're almost going to win probably 85% of the time. And so the question is, when we get to the postseason, when we know you can prepare, some of these teams have had single-digit practices for the entire season to this point, since the year started. When in the postseason you can actually practice and game plan in between games, will we see a return to normalcy? The Lakers better hope so, because I don't think the Lakers offensively, which is what their weakness is. You're right, their defense is spectacular, but they can't bring it every night offensively. I don't think they can do it 4 out of 7 times. So they're going to have to hope that things return to what we normally see in the postseason, because if they don't, this is set for the Nets to win it.
So, Wendy, let's talk about the offensive power of the Nets. It's off the charts, but are you at all concerned about the chemistry between the big three? Because as we know, they've only played 7 games together this season so far.
The only chemistry I'm worried about is Kyrie and James Harden. I'm not worried about Kevin Durant at all. He has shown repeatedly that he can play with different lineups in different roles. Durant is one of the most malleable superstars I've ever seen. LeBron, because of all the guys he can defend, maybe a little bit more, but Durant can be so many different things to so many different teammates. I'm not worried about him at all. And I think their other guys, their older guys, are there knowing they're playing a role. The whole thing has been, can Harden and Kyrie coexist together, sharing the ball? And right out of the gates, I think Kyrie yielded to Harden. I think it was like the second or third week they were playing together, Kyrie said, James, you take the ball, you run our offense, I'll play off the ball, which was no small thing for him to say, even though that makes sense because you look at the way Harden was playing, you say, heck yeah, this guy's an MVP as a point guard. Kyrie left LeBron James because he didn't want to play that way. And so as soon as I saw that, now granted, it's tenuous because Kyrie tends to change his opinion and mood on things at times. But once I saw that, I said, look out for these Nets. And Kyrie and Harden do have quite a bit of time together so far.
I actually think that a lot of people are worried about that relationship, Kyrie Irving and James Harden, when they need not to be, because obviously these guys have unique personas that sort of make them polarizing figures. James Harden, with how he plays the game, well, he settled that by, taking a backseat and figuring out whatever role this team, the Brooklyn Nets, needs to win. Kyrie Irving, maybe for things not necessarily tied to the basketball court, but anytime something needs to get done, they find a way. Kyrie Irving, I think at the start of the season, it was clear that he wanted to be the guy, that this was his team. And we saw it through his performances. The thing that actually stood out to me the most, Brian, is actually when James Harden goes out because of the hamstring, what does Kyrie do to respond? Drops 40 points and knows to flip the switch and take over. These guys have each other's backs in a way that we don't really acknowledge all the time in the media. And I think that's what makes them special, sort of the chip on the shoulder mentality that each and every one of them carry. So I'm not necessarily worried about, the personalities meshing. I think health, number one, first and foremost, will be the only thing that deters this team from a title.
Yeah, Chiney, I think you're absolutely right, because according to BPI, with the healthy Big Three, the Nets have a 22% chance to win the title. The only team with better odds as of this point are the Jazz with 24.5%. But let's talk about the Jazz, shall we? Because these West Coast games are killing my sleep schedule, but they're so good that you kind of have to stay up for them. Last night was that case, an overtime thriller between the top two seeds in the West. The Suns besting the Jazz 117 to 113, and it was Devin Booker's 7 points in the extra period